Hi, everybody, and welcome to Developers Do Care About Security, Building a More Collaborative Path. Security teams and development teams tend to butt heads, and we know this. You've probably all experienced some of that friction, some of that tension, and that's why we're here today, to talk about how we can remove some of that friction, speed up our developers, and still securely deploy our applications. My name is Madeline Vanderpelt. I'm a development manager at Trend Micro, and I work with teams who deploy their applications to production many times a day. And I've seen firsthand some of this friction that can be involved in securing those applications and getting them to production safely. So today I want to recap a little bit about what we talked about at AWS Reinforce this summer, and sort of give you some context to set the stage for today's discussion. And then today, I really want to focus on our services that are running in production. How can we secure them, make sure they're still doing what we expect them to do, not doing what we don't want them to be doing, and all of that fun stuff. So, if you caught me at Reinforce, basically we spent a lot of time talking about this question. What do developers think about while building software? Why are we thinking about so many different things? And how does security play into all of that? So if you didn't catch the talk, you can grab the QR code there. I can put it back up at the end as well. But yeah, go check it out. And so I took a stab at trying to figure out all of the different things that I'm thinking about when I'm developing code. And this is what I came up with. I'm thinking about, my UX requirements, my integrations with other services, performance, automation, lunch, when am I gonna go pet my cat? All those things. And it's a lot, right? When you actually look at it all spread out there are a lot of different things, and we can't all be experts in each of those things. So you'll also notice there's only a few that actually are related to security. Right? And so it makes sense that security isn't always front of mind when we're deploying and developing our applications because we have all of these other things going on. And if you use AWS Managed Services, you can actually reduce the cognitive complexity of a lot of those things to a point where you don't have to think about them so much. Right? We can take advantage of Lambda, and we don't have to think so much about scaling, maybe, or other services. So how can we take it from this to something much smaller, where we're focused on our customers, on our requirements for them, where we're focused on the UX, the things that the computer can't do for us, and still launch, obviously. So we have these two groups of experts, and like I said, they're butting heads a lot. There's a lot of friction. But really, it's not just security experts and developers. We have security experts, and we have the developers who are also experts. They're experts in what they're writing and building and how it's getting deployed and the resources that they're using in the cloud. And then we have the security team who is experts in risk identification and mitigation, compliance, and all of those requirements that we don't want to have to know about as developers. And what we need to do is get these two groups of experts talking to each other, communicating, collaborating, instead of handing things over from one team to the other and saying, do this, right? We need to be building our processes together and taking advantage of both of those expertise. Because one without the other doesn't really provide a complete picture. We only have half of the picture if we only think about what we're building and not how we're securing it. We also focused a little bit at Reinforce on securing our applications pre-deployment. So as we're taking them to production, what do we need to do? What do we need to be thinking about to getting our applications there while reducing developer effort? And here were a few of the ways that we talked about doing that. So I'm going to just touch on these briefly. And as I mentioned, we're going to shift focus a little bit to post-deployment today. So building knowledge. We need our teams to have a common language. We need to know what the security team is trying to do, right? what the development teams are trying to do. We need to communicate that between our teams. We need to build training that's actually relevant to the things that our developers are building, the tools that they're using. We need to understand all of those tools, how to use them efficiently and effectively, and not just waste people's time because they're learning a tool that doesn't matter to them. We need to get buy-in. And when I say that, I mean you wouldn't develop a product that you hadn't talked to your customers about, right? You wouldn't go, here you go, I built you this beautiful security solution. It does A, B, and C. And they're like, well, we don't need that, right? You talk to your customers. Why don't we talk to each other first about what our needs are, about where our pain points are, and then work together to solve those? Great example of this. A little while ago, our security teams came to our developers, and they said, hey, we have this awesome new tool to detect secrets that have been accidentally checked into GitHub. Cool, that sounds useful. All right, what's the catch? The catch was you had to add it to every single repository. I heard a giggle. I love that. Yeah, that was my reaction too. My teams have hundreds of repositories. We don't have 5. It's 500. So that was a non-starter for us. And as I sat there, I reflected and I went, why weren't we involved when you were gathering requirements for this project, right? After talking about with them, they came up with a solution that we could add it at the organization level, and we have many, many less organizations than we do repositories, so that was great. But if we'd done this beforehand, we wouldn't have wasted time, we wouldn't have delayed rolling out this new process, this new system to check for secrets. And in that delay, maybe there was something that was checked in, right? Maybe we were vulnerable to something. So get buy-in. Talk to each other, is what I'm trying to say. Third, we talked about analyzing your services. Specifically with the AWS WellArchitected tool, it's one of my go-tos for that sort of thing. We're going to talk a bit more about this in depth, so I won't stay too long on it now. And automation, as we mentioned before, right, we can offload a lot of this work to automated services, things that we can put in our pipelines to detect third-party vulnerabilities, scan our containers, check for misconfigurations. Are we following best practices when we're creating cloud resources? All those good things. And then last was using threat models. And this was another one that I was super skeptical about at first. They said, hey, we want you to do this whole threat model. You got to talk about the data and the network and how does it go from A to B to C. And I was like, that sounds like a lot of work, and I don't understand what I get out of it. But I did it anyway, suffered through it, and actually learned a lot in the process. Threat modeling is a really cool way to analyze what you've built or what you're about to build, what you're deploying, what the application actually does, thinking about your data, thinking about the networking, how all these things are working together, and encryption, and all these awesome things. And I actually sat with someone from the security team when I did it, and they told me about all these things that I had never considered. They asked questions that I didn't know to ask. But I also did the same for them. And because it was a conversation, and we were trying to understand both sides of the story, we actually both learned something, and in the end, I found it was quite valuable. And it only took less time than I thought it would too. So do them early, do them often, but I personally think if you do it while you're actually designing your architecture before you've built a ton of stuff, it means that it's a lot easier to change your architecture or to adjust things as you're building them rather than in that rush. Those few days you're trying to get to production, you've got a deadline, it's rushing, and everything's hard, and everybody's stressed, and nobody wants to take on this extra sort of work, right? Do it ahead of time. Front load it into your process. Okay, so enough about that. Let's go to post-deployment, which is where I want to spend most of my time. Also, feel free to join in a conversation if you have comments or questions as we go. I don't like just talking at people, so it's a conversation. Also, there's stickers. I asked for things I could throw to you guys, and they gave me stickers, and I thought they'd be more like ninja stars. So I figured I'd set them down up here. Come grab them if you want them. Yeah. OK, so securing our cloud-native applications post-deployment. Still, we want to reduce our developer effort. You deployed your service to production. Now what? How do we know that it's still doing what we expect it to do, only what we expect it to do? How do we know nothing else is going on in our AWS account? How do we know, someone didn't go in and change something during an incident and not put it back? All these things that happen, right? When I was approaching this, I took the similar approach to when I was thinking about what are developers thinking about. And I took a step back, and I looked at my teams, and I tried to count all of the different things that they do in a day. They're defining product requirements. They're working on the next project. They're maintaining, I had one team of 5 people maintaining 15 services and still developing new ones, right? I had people doing operations, people doing, the same people doing operations, development, QA, all of these different hats that they're wearing. And it's a lot. This shift to DevOps has really changed the way that we develop software, and it's also changed the role that we expect our developers to take on. And like I mentioned, when we're developing a new service, we've got 15 to maintain. At what point do you decide enough is enough? I'm going to just put this into maintenance mode and focus over here, right? How quickly do you jump from finishing one project to the next? Are they ever really done? If it's operating in production and you're responsible for that, is it ever done? Or do you just have 17 projects on the go, technically? So we need to create time and space to think about the technical debt, to think about operations and maintenance of all of the things that we have running in production. And if we're only ever thinking about the new shiny stuff that we're building, then things will start to fall apart, we'll have incidents, and it'll be really stressful as opposed to, creating space, creating time, building that into what we expect our developers to do all the time and making it easy and enjoyable. So to do that, we have to understand our services. We have to know what we've built, what we're building, how we're deploying it, what services are we using in AWS, how are we monitoring it, what does normal look like? Do we know? How do we know? What metrics are we using? What alarms? All of that, dashboards. And we should probably, check in on those things from time to time and have some operational reviews. Has anybody in this room actually ever done an operational review of your service that's running in production? Show of hands. So that's like 4 people? 5? Okay. Not very many, considering there's quite a few more than that here. And how many of you who've done them do it regularly on a scheduled cadence? Okay, so almost everybody who said that they do them. So that's really good. Because if we just do it once, cool, we've checked a box. Oh, great question. What's an operational review? Love it. I should have explained that. An operational review is actually going in, looking at your service, checking in on the metrics, your dashboards, your normal operating conditions of your service, and just seeing if it's doing what you expect it to do. If it's doing things that you're not expecting, could be looking at some logs sometimes, really anything that tells you about how your service is running. And we do this so that we know what our normal is, right? And then from there, we can know when it's not normal. I know I've had times in the past where we went and looked at a service, realized something wasn't quite right, and we'd actually missed something that we probably should have had an alarm for that we just didn't think about at the time. Because when you're building your service, you can never find every single edge case, right? Things happen in production that we don't expect to happen when we're building things. So operational reviews are really good to catch those sort of things. Also checking in on your service level objectives, making sure that you're meeting what you say you're going to do for your customers, that sort of stuff. Yes?
Do you all follow like BDD practices, or behavior-driven development? It sounds like you do. but maybe you just take pieces of it and incorporate it into your own processes?
So the question was if we follow behavior-driven development, or BDD, practices. I don't know if we do explicitly, so much as it's just the way that we think about building software on my teams. Obviously, I only have experience with them. But the way that we sort of approach it is, what do we want it to do? What problem are we trying to solve, right? And then how can we build something that does that, as opposed to just building something and then hoping it does what we want it to do. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. So yeah, we have to understand our services, what we're building, how we're building it, how we want them to be operating. As I mentioned earlier, one of the tools we can use for this is the AWS WellArchitected tool. And basically, all it does is ask you a series of questions. And there's 6 pillars. I won't go through them all. But for each of the pillars, there's a series of questions that are meant to get you thinking about your service, meant to get you thinking about, is it reliable? What are you doing to improve reliability? How performant is it? Is it operationally ready? Should it be running in production? Do you have alarms and metrics and monitoring in place? All sorts of different things like that. And there's optional lenses that you can basically use to provide another perspective, another way of viewing your service. And one of these is the AWS serverless application lens. I call this one out specifically because my teams are very serverless focused, and that's the most useful one for us. But there are others as well. You can also define custom lenses, which I think is a really cool idea, because in a custom lens, you can set your own best practices. Questions that you think, you've maybe collaborated within your company, across teams. What do you think you should be asking yourselves before you go to production, or while your service is running in production? And you can collect those, build your custom lens, or multiple custom lenses, and you can share them across AWS accounts. And that means that it doesn't matter where you're developing, you have access to those questions, to that lens, and can apply it across different workloads, across different teams throughout your organization. So something I didn't know about until recently and started experimenting a little bit with. Yes?
Are you using infrastructure as code to manage all those? Are you using CDK or Terraform?
The question was if we're using infrastructure as code to manage all of our things, or CDK, et cetera. My teams mostly use infrastructure as code, serverless framework, and ultimately CloudFormation under the hood. I played around with the custom lenses a little bit. I haven't tried them as infrastructure as code. I imagine you probably can do it, but don't quote me on that. So, yeah. Okay, now we've got our services under control. How do we manage our AWS accounts? How many of you actually manage your own AWS accounts for your teams, or your projects, or your services? I see like a couple of hands. By manage, I mean, dealing with setting them up, making sure they've got all the services enabled that you need enabled, regions that you need enabled, all of that sort of stuff. So just a couple people. And how many have a different team, like InfoSec team or IT team, that spins those up for you and manages your accounts? Most everybody else. Okay, cool. My company, we have sort of a similar approach where we have InfoSec teams who manage our accounts because we have so many accounts, like hundreds of accounts. How do they know that they've set them up the right way for each team? How do we have them baselined? How do we know that we have consistency across our regions, across our accounts, across all the different areas that we're deploying, right? And when the baseline changes, and there's always new things coming out, right? New tools that we want to use, new vulnerabilities, all sorts of different things that we want to protect against, new best practices. How do we apply those across all of our accounts to make sure that they're all still at the same baseline, not just to new accounts that we create? Here's a few tools that I've found useful. Theirs is not an exhaustive list. There are many other tools that are also useful. First and foremost is AWS Organizations and Control Tower. And these ones, in my mind, go very hand in hand. So organizations allow you to centrally manage your environments as you scale out to more accounts. You can put them into organizational units where like you have your analysis data team, you have other teams deploying other things, whatever. You can organize them however you want. You can apply policies and things across your organizational units, across all of your accounts at root level. Really, really cool. Consolidated billing, consolidated logs if you really want. So lots of stuff that you can do there. And then Control Tower takes that a step further, and it allows you to orchestrate, create, manage those AWS accounts. You can actually deploy like CloudFormation templates and different things across all of those accounts to do some of that baselining work. Make sure that things are set up the way that you want them to be set up. And yeah, you can auto-provision them. As an account is created and added to your organization, it can automatically go and do that. You don't have to go in and like, know that you've added a new account. Yep.
Do you guys use guardrails to establish like a protection?
Yeah, you can use guardrails for that too. The question was, do we use guardrails to establish protection and different things? Yes, we do. There's also, at the AWS organization level, you can use service control policies. It's a good one to define what AWS services are enabled or disabled for different users or roles in your accounts, what regions are enabled or services are enabled in what regions, things like that. Can be very handy, and that can be applied at the root level or at those organizational units or individually to accounts as well. So another sort of guardrail. Yeah. AWS config allows you to centrally assess, audit, and evaluate the configuration and relationships of your resources. Basically, it simplifies change management and allows you to correlate changes to events and act on those events. So it can be a very handy tool. Say you have something that you set up you expect to never change, and then it does. You can get notified about that. You can act on it. You can react. This wouldn't be complete without IAM. I touched on that a little bit with the service control policies. But there's account level controls, and you can do things like centrally managing credentials if you have tokens that need to be accessed across accounts and things like that. Cost Explorer is probably one that you are questioning why it's on this slide. This one, I actually, it allows you to do centralized billing and visualize, understand, and manage your costs and what your usage is across different services and all of that, which is great. It also allows you to do anomaly detection. And I don't think this is something that everybody might be aware of. But basically, if your account goes from spending $500 a month to $5,000 all of a sudden, it can alert you. Or if one service starts going a little bit out of control and the cost is rising rapidly, it can tell you. I had a really cool moment with this actually a couple years ago. My team was working on our authentication and authorization part of Cloud One. And we used Cognito for part of this. And we just created some pipeline tests. And we use them as canaries as well, so they run every 5 minutes or so. And these tests, what it was doing is it was creating a user, running the tests, doing the things it wanted to do, and then deleting that user from Cognito. Seems simple enough. And you're like, why does this relate to billing? Well, Cognito charges you for every active user. So when we created a user every 5 minutes, check, 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 our bill just started stacking up, right? And we went from $500 a month to $5,000 a month. And my manager went, whoa, what happened? What happened to Cognito? And when we dug in, we realized that this is what was going on. And we sort of essentially had misconfigured how we wanted to use the service. And it allowed us to detect that. And we changed the way we were doing our tests and got that bill down. We reduced it by 87% just through fixing this one little issue with our tests. So Cost Explorer might not seem like something that you should all be looking at, but manage your bills. Okay. So those are some tools that we can use to manage our accounts, baseline our accounts. There's lots of other tools that can be helpful to collaborate with our security teams as well and make sure that we're ensuring our services that are deployed are still secure. And auditing appliance doesn't sound like the most fun area, but that's why we have tools to take that away from us having to do it. So I touched on config already, but you can correlate changes to events. And you can know what user, role, AWS service, who did it, when did they do it, what happened. And you can automate alerts when those changes occur. You can act on them. AWS CloudTrail is basically AWS's auditing service. It also tracks every action taken by a user or role or AWS service, and whether those actions were taken through the API, the console, CDK, CLI, it doesn't matter. Whatever made that change, it tracks it. And you can see a trail of exactly what has gone on in your account. So if you're trying to figure out, how this thing got deployed, you can go and look in CloudTrail for that. You can also use CloudTrail Insights for anomaly detection. There it is again, a common thread. Basically, I want to know when something's happened so I can go and react. And I want to know before it becomes a bigger problem, right? That's why anomaly detection in CloudTrail, in using config, in Cost Explorer, why all these things are so important. If you have many accounts, many teams working on different things, you can forward all of your CloudTrail logs to a centralized place as well if you're managing multiple accounts. And then Trusted Advisor is another one that can tell you, like, if you're following AWS best practices for configuration, how to optimize or make things more secure in your account. It has lots of different checks, essentially. And another one that it checks is your service quotas. So who has ever hit a service limit in AWS? How annoying was that for you? Extremely, thank you. And did it prevent you from doing what you needed to do at the time? Yes. So let's say we're in the middle of a customer impacting P0 incident and we need to roll out a change. Let's say we want to add another role to our account as part of that change. Oh no, we've hit a service limit. We can't do that. We have to go to AWS, try to get them to increase it maybe, or rapidly try to figure out what we can delete so we can deploy this thing. Long lead time. Causes a lot of delay, causes a lot of stress to what might already be a very stressful situation. And it's unnecessary, right? So what I did is I actually created a little tool, just a little Lambda basically, that goes and checks the service quotas through Trusted Advisor, runs those checks, and hooked those up. They basically, each check has a metric in CloudWatch. And so I hooked up those metrics to CloudWatch alarms, to PagerDuty, and voila. Now when we're approaching a service limit, we get an alarm. And we get an alarm when it's at 70%, when it's in that yellow, hey, you should probably check on this range, not 99% usage where it's like, oh, you gotta act on this now, right? Gives us some time, some lead time, like you said. So some cool things you can do with those to really kind of get ahead of some of that noise and headaches, stuff like that. The next section was identity and access management, back to AWS IAM. Biggest thing here is the principle of least privilege. You've probably all heard about this before. Essentially, we want to limit the actions that a user, a role, something can do, the actions they can take, and what they can act on. to only the things that they need to be able to do. So for example, I'm not going to give my Lambda permissions to look at all of the Dynamo tables. It's only going to be able to read the one specific to my service to that, so that we're not sharing all that data and publicly readable and all this sort of stuff. You can also use IAM Access Advisor, which will identify unused permissions on a role. So I know in the past, I've created a service. It does, let's say it does 5 things today. And eventually, we reconfigure some things. Maybe we remove that Dynamo table, and it no longer needs to be able to read Dynamo tables. Access Advisor can actually look at the role that's attached to my Lambda in this case and tell me, hey, you haven't used these permissions in 30 days or 60 days or however long, and maybe you should get rid of them. And then you can use Access Analyzer to actually generate policies for your roles. And it'll actually look through, I think probably using Access Advisor under the hood, but somehow it tells you exactly what permissions, what resources you're interacting with, and it can help you build a role that follows the principle of least privilege. So very cool. You can link all those things together. They're all in the AWS Identity Access Management service. Fun to go play with and check them out. I'd be curious, how many of you have a role that has more permissions than it needs? Okay. Last area is networking and data. So Amazon VPC can be helpful for networking, making sure that we have things that are private in private subnets and all that sort of stuff. It's an additional layer of security to control the data flow and networking to and from your resources, and it may or may not be applicable to your applications. It's one of those things that if you don't need to use it, don't. If you do, that's why it's there. And you can use flow logs as well, which can go to Kinesis or CloudWatch or S3, and can actually monitor the data, the network traffic. That's the word I was looking for. You can monitor the traffic going to and from your resources in your VPC. And Lambdas actually can run in a VPC. So if you need them there, they can do it. I know there used to be some headaches around that. They've made it a lot easier. The cold starts are a lot shorter than they used to be, and there were some cool announcements this week that will reduce that even more. So don't think you can't use a Lambda in a VPC, because you can, if you need to. A couple other ones I threw up here. Firewall Manager does exactly what you would expect it to do. It manages firewalls and can do that across accounts, networks, applications. AWS Shield, it's managed distributed denial of service protection. So this is at your network level, not your application level. WAF is what comes in, or the web app firewall. That's the one that's application level protection against common exploits that affect things like availability, security, too many people calling your service all at the same time, throttling, all that sort of stuff. So as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list of things. These are just some of the ones that I've come across in my cloud journey so far that could be useful if you're trying to do some of these things. So what tools have you added to your toolbox today? I hope some of these are helpful to you. I hope you can go and try and experiment and play with some things. I feel like that's the best way to learn, is really just to get your hands dirty and try some things, figure out what works and doesn't work for you. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can shout them out. You can come up and talk to me afterwards, whichever you prefer. Feel free to grab stickers. Sorry I didn't throw them out at you. But yeah.